Hello, dear viewer. A rather instructive story awaits you, which can overtake anyone in their poor life, especially if you are married. So get ready for this story full of emotion by making some tea or bringing yourself something to snack on. Also, as always, I'll remind you about like and subscribe. Be sure to click them. And now let's move on to the story. Quiet family life. Full story. You ponder the big decisions in life. What you don't think about are the thousands of everyday decisions that can just as easily set you back 50 miles down a bad road. This is about one of them. I wake up in the middle of the night and find my wife rolled over on my arm. I sleep with my arms outstretched. I don't know why. Ask my mom. Maybe my crib was too wide. Anyway, upon waking up, I found my arm fully clamped, about 1/4 of an inch above the elbow. One option was to gently remove her, but I was afraid that movement might wake her up. The wife gets scared easily, and whenever she does, you get a menacing, "Stop it." Most husbands understand this tone, but I also thought she might fall over from surprise. Anyway, I was already in the honey. Her breathing had escalated to a loud snore. It was fun. I was feeling very cocky, downright devilish, until she said, "Yes, Jack." I stopped halfway through. The problem is, my name isn't Jack. I pulled my hand away abruptly. She pulled the blanket over herself and said, "Stop it! Look, I told you so." Then she rolled over on her side, facing me, and snored. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking, who is this Jack? And why is he in my wife's dreams? I was more puzzled than alarmed. After all, she was asleep, and for all I knew, Jack could have been her pet name for Leonardo DiCaprio. We had a very good marriage, and throughout the years I never had the slightest inkling that she might even consider being with another. Then the devil sitting on my other shoulder reminded me that she was still a very attractive 42-year-old woman, and I was a 50-year-old lump. We met at a party. She had a pedagogical degree but was working as a development editor in a book publishing house. I was already an established writer. I never would have gotten to that party if I hadn't been dragged there by my literary agent Sid. He didn't think I wasn't going out enough. He was right about that. I spent my early years moonlighting as a writer at any random job that paid more than $1. With no money to take a girl out, the best I could hope for socially was to settle a score at a party. However, thanks to a series of books and magazine articles, I was by then, if not exactly rich, then quite well off. I had the usual short affairs throughout my 20s, but none of these women did anything for me. Instead, I stayed at home, and a lot of it. It's easy to find beautiful people. But Dorothy Parker, who is beautiful and possesses a combination of intelligence, wit, and good humor, is a rarity. I noticed her right away. She had a cute face, a totally wicked sense of humor, and she was a writer. It didn't take me more than 6 nanoseconds to realize she was the one. I won't bore you with the details of the chase and capture. Suffice it to say, I also found that she was exceptionally talented in areas that were not evident in her public persona. I've always equated high intelligence with extraordinary skills, and if that assumption is correct, this girl was an Einstein. I proposed one bright fall afternoon, getting down on one knee next to the Bethesda fountain in Central Park. We were married in December of that year. Our first child came 2 years later, and 2 more years later, we added another. We had the perfect life together. We both worked in the writing business, so we never had a shortage of things to talk about. At that time, I was earning very good money, and she was not poor herself. So we traveled a lot. She was my best friend. We moved to Long Island. She took up golf. I played golf with her, wrote, and we also went sailing on our little 27-foot yacht. We spent many summer nights anchored in Long Island Sound, making the boat rock. In fact, our personal life was as perfect as all the other moments. She was totally relaxed and in perfect command of the art. With such a busy existence, it's understandable that I wouldn't give much thought to the strange events of that night. That was until 5 days later, when she walked into my home office, leading a tall, good-looking guy in his 30s to 40s, with a shy, almost diffuse appearance. I work from home, and while she still has commitments in the city, she mostly lives there too. So we have a quiet space in our house that is dedicated to contemplation and creative thinking. Of course, the deep thinking and inspiration that takes place in this room is somewhat influenced by having a 15-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl as regular guests. She said, Tom, I want you to meet Jack." The little voice in my head gibbered incoherently, but I smiled, extended my hand, and said, "Nice to meet you." Needless to say, I was not pleased. "So Jack really does exist?" She said, "Jack is a new author we've taken on as a development project, and he's a big fan of your work. He came all this way because he wanted to meet you." A little voice in my head was throwing things around and raging, "What you really meant to say was that this one wants to hug you." But instead I smiled amiably and said, "Well, that's very flattering. Please sit down and tell me about yourself, Jack." He sat down in one of the leather armchairs next to the fireplace, and my wife sat across from him on the couch next to my desk. Jack really was a good-looking guy. I quickly learned that he was married, had 3 kids, and his wife lived in Staten Island. He was 39 years old. He was working as a high school English teacher, but had finished his first novel. It was sent from publisher to publisher until it ended up with my wife's people. They thought he looked promising. That's where I came in handy. They felt I could help Jack turn it into something that would sell, and that's assuming I was willing to work with him. I looked him over carefully. He actually looked nervous, like a rookie being introduced to a veteran player. My wife looked at him with some interest, and what I thought was hunger. I leaned back in my chair, interlocked my fingers in front of me, and asked, "And what do I get as a result if I do this?" My thin voice muttered to itself, "Besides horns." My wife said, "We'll pay you the standard editor's fee, of course, and I really think Jack has talent." My thin voice started pounding on the table again. "You think he has talent?" I said to myself. "Well, fuck it. Keep your enemies closer." And I said, "I'll do that, but you two will have to be here every day for the rest of the week to work with me." I thought I could better realize how screwed I was by watching them together. I'm not usually this jealous. I know Millie loves me. Yes, her parents were so misguided that they named their daughter Millicent. And I know she must be a fool to throw away 17 years of marital bliss along with 2 kids. But despite the incident of a week ago, there was something between them. It was evident in the way she looked at him, and he at her. This was evident in the way they leaned toward each other while talking. And that's putting it mildly. All of this was causing me serious blood pressure issues. Part of the problem was that it was so unfair. At autograph sessions and other public events, young men throw themselves at me, and it never occurred to me to go left. And it's not hard not to notice the adoring stares and attention from the author's female fans at parties. But throughout it all, it never occurred to me to do anything other than go home to my wife and family. In fact, Millie and I were rarely apart. I planned trips out of town with an eye toward whether she could join me. I worked from home, and the only time she wasn't physically with me was when she traveled into town for occasional meetings. I quickly learned that for the past month the meetings had only been with Jack. How did I know that? They told me. I remembered a couple late nights, but they were so honest and candid that they really did seem like a strict editor-author relationship. I kept telling myself that I had no reason to worry. He was being respectful, and she was as loving and attentive as ever. But I had to find out. Suspicion is an insidious disease. I didn't want doubts and uncertainties to affect our relationship, so I just had to be sure. Accordingly, on the following Monday, when she left for the city, I rode in the train following her. I know anyone reading this will think I'm paranoid, but my wife and my marriage are so important to me. I decided that I would observe her normal day and calm down. Then I could put this whole sordid affair behind me. I was sitting in the park across from her house, reading the Times when she came out of the driveway around 11:30. She caught a cab and left. I caught the next cab, and I actually managed to use the phrase, "Follow this cab." She came out at the plaza. I thought, at least she has class. I lurked in the shadows of the lobby while she checked in. Jack rose from the chair he was sitting in at the other end of the lobby and joined her at the elevator. He embraced her with touching affection. Did she pull away? As the door closed, I saw him turn her toward him to kiss her. I don't think I could have been more devastated. But the part of me that still didn't believe it was really happening had to witness it. I realized that this is the moment in the story when the aggrieved husband plans to sell the traitor in cold blood. But this is the real world, not a fantasy land. And unfortunately, I still loved my wife unconditionally. That was the problem. Standing there, I was in a state of panic. I didn't expect anything to happen, so I didn't have a plan for what to do next. And let me assure you that no one thinks rationally while all the dominoes are falling around them. But my lizard brain knew what it needed: hard evidence. Like most successful writers, I'm a very good actor. After all, what is storytelling but acting in the written word? And if I can play the part, I can hold on to it, regardless of how I really feel. Today's role was that of a husband meeting his wife at the plaza. So I approached the clerk with the concerned look of a guy who got caught up in a meeting and didn't make the date. I chose someone who didn't wait. My goal was that the casual chatter between her and the salesman would not interfere with my story. I said with concern in my voice, "My wife may have just checked in. I was supposed to join her, but I was distracted." He asked for my ID, driver's license, and credit card. I handed them to him, glancing nervously at my watch. He gave me a room number, I said hastily, as if unintentionally. "Could you burn me a key card? I bet she was so mad she wouldn't give it to me." He looked at the monitor, saw what I knew he would see, and handed me the card. I said, "Thank you," turned around, and went to the elevators. I got off on the 4th floor and went down to my room. I realized that life on this planet was about to come to a complete and catastrophic end, and I wanted to prolong that moment as long as possible. So I stood there for a few seconds, remembering all the good times. Then I pulled myself together and swiped the map. The light turned green. I stepped cautiously inside, pulled out my phone, and turned on the recording. I didn't have to strain my hearing. The only one who could see me was Millie. But she was so lost in it that Martians could have invaded Lower Manhattan, and she wouldn't have noticed. And here's where this piece, I had to cut it out so as not to break any rules. Also, let me remind you that we have all the stories on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a like, and we'll keep going. I recorded everything in glorious 1080p digital format from start to finish. It wasn't that long, but it felt like an eternity. It was particularly agonizing, however, because this time I only had the camera in my hands. They were just about to relax when I put my phone on a nearby table and started clapping slowly and loudly. That quickly brought them back to reality. They simultaneously turned their heads in my direction in bewilderment. It's hard to think rationally when you've just had your brain blown up. I held the phone in front of my face again and nonchalantly filmed their reactions. He had a look of utter amazement that quickly turned to absolute horror. I said coldly, "Get out." He was much younger and in much better shape than I was, but he could see what was behind my eyes, and it was scary. So he grabbed his stuff and sprinted out into the hallway. I filmed his exit. I turned to her and said one word, "Why?" She froze, shocked. Then she began to cry. I defiantly turned off the VCR and sat back in my chair. "I don't think I could stand on my feet for long," she cried. I said, "You better get yourself together and answer me, or it's going to be shown on YouTube right here from the room." She began to scream. The pain behind that scream, however, was more like a hyena hitting the rocks. I said, "I'm out of here," and headed for the door. She uttered an almost incoherent "no," and seemed to make an effort to pull herself together. The emotion playing on her face was terrible. I went back and sat down. She was still sobbing and taking deep breaths, as if she were in an environment with very little oxygen. I waited a little longer. Finally, she managed to pull herself together and was able to speak. She said, "Tom, I'm really sorry." I replied, "They all say that. Can't you do it better? You just ruined our lives." She started wailing again. I asked, genuinely surprised, "Are you crying just because you got caught?" She jumped out of bed at me. She pounced on me. I raised my hands to defend myself and backed away from her onslaught. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I ask, "What was that for?" This may seem silly, but in all the stories it is at this point that the guy beats his unfaithful wife, not the other way around. It was an act I never expected, and it led me to conclude that there was more to her grief than the fact that I had just caught her. She wailed, "I love you! Only you!" I hummed and said, "That's a strange way to show it." She began to come to her senses. She slowly got up from the floor. She hesitantly walked to the bed and sat down. I asked the classic husband question, "How long?" She snorted and replied, 2 weeks. I did the math. This was just before her sleepy revelation. I asked, Why did you do this to me and the children? She said, I don't know what I was thinking. It was only twice, and I thought you would never know. This was supposed to be the last time, I said, as sarcastically as I could. Really? Really? I hoped there was doubt in my voice about that statement. Then I asked the obvious question, Do you love him? She replied, God, no. I asked, So it was just a little excursion on the side? She looked like she didn't know how to answer. I said, Look at it from my point of view. My wife, whom I love more than life, has decided to cheat with a guy she can only describe as a sweetie pie. You have no idea how inferior I feel, and more importantly, how well you've communicated to me that our marriage has no value to you. She started sobbing again. I was tired of this hysteria, and I could barely stand on my own 2 feet. I knew I had to get out of there, if only to keep my own sanity. So I said, I'm not going to torture you with this. I think I have all the information I need for a lawyer. At that moment, her howls intensified to the scale of a jet fan. I said we need to cool off a bit, so I'm going to take the kids on vacation for a couple of weeks, and when I get back, we can discuss what to do next. I added as gently as I could, I want you to know that nothing has changed for me. I still love you, and I'll probably love you forever, but I don't think I can trust you or live with you like I used to. Unfortunately, we have children, so we have to find a way forward that won't hurt them. That's what I want us both to think about while I'm gone. I got up to leave. As I was leaving, I said, By the way, tell him I'll send the video to his wife as soon as I get on the train. I hope she'll be pleased. I looked back. She was lying face down on the bed, literally hysterical. I was really in a difficult position. She was a wonderful wife and the woman of my dreams. That was a fact. No matter what anyone says, 17 years of that kind of attitude doesn't just evaporate, no matter what activity you catch her doing on any given Monday. And in the balance of life, the sum of what we've built together outweighed the attractions of the last half hour in the same proportion as a super black hole would outweigh a pea. So honestly, I'd probably make up with her on the spot if it was possible for me to trust her. Judge me all you want, but that's how I felt about her and our marriage. And I don't believe anyone who has had the same life experience could feel any differently. But the deciding factor was that she was clearly enjoying every second of this hour spent. In my simple-minded mind, it was a Gordian knot. And I couldn't cut it. I was sure that if she'd cheated on me once, just for the thrill of another man, she'd do it again. And then another horrible thought hit me. I wasn't sure that was her only cheating. There were millions of similar ideas running around in my head. I was physically and emotionally shattered, and the people on the train avoided me as if I were the Unabomber muttering about destroying the world. I downloaded the clip to my iPad to save it. The whole Apple compatibility thing is a blessing. Then I found his cell phone and called. He saw me videotaping them, so he knew what leverage I had. I needed an honest story. He answered on the second ring. I said sarcastically, Well. He replied, I'm really, really sorry. I found that oddly amusing. I hummed and said, I hear that a lot these days. He said, Before you ask, I was the one who started it. She's so beautiful, I just had to do it. It was out of my hands. Neither of us meant to hurt you. She said she had never done anything like that before and said the guilt was killing her. She wanted to end it after the first time, but I talked her into it one more time, so we'd get it over with. This was getting absurd. I said with absolute disbelief, Are you telling me that I saw you two doing some kind of psychological training in the jungle to piss each other off? Treat me with respect. I'm not that stupid. He said, No, I swear. I had to work hard to talk her into it. We had just finished editing and it was getting late. I offered to buy her dinner and then come back and finish the job. I talked her into a bottle of wine and then most of another. I wasn't really going to edit. When we got back, we were alone on her floor, and I took my chance. I used every technique I knew to get results. The devil on my other shoulder snorted and said, Very gallant of him to take all the blame, but she didn't say no, he said. When it went away, she was distraught. I even laughed out loud. I said, And even though she let you do all that, do you believe she had never done it before? He said, I swear on my mother's grave, All she talked about was how much she loved you and how she was afraid you'd get hurt. And I couldn't get her to do it again until I threatened to tell you." He finished. "We chose the plaza to end it because I told her I needed something special to forget." That solved all my doubts. His wife should have gotten the whole movie. I said in conversation, "You didn't have a single thought about your 3 kids while you were there? They're going to be very disappointed in Dad when your wife sees this." He said, "God, please, no." Then he began to cry. He said, "I will do anything." I said, "I know roughly how my wife felt, don't I?" At that moment, it dawned on me that I had everything I needed. I still wanted to be there for her. That was the saddest part, and I could have gotten over it if it had only been a one-time thing. I'm a pragmatist and a very tough person, and you'd have to be a complete idiot to hit the delete button on a woman you were born to be in a relationship with over such a pathetic fling. But I had to be absolutely sure that it was over and that nothing like that would ever happen again. And I said, "I just changed my mind. I am not going to send this to your wife, Millie's boss, your school principal, and everyone else I can think of. I know it would completely ruin both of your lives, and while I would do it to you in a heartbeat, I just love my wife too much. So I'm going to hold this up as a guarantee, and if I find out that you're lying about any part of this story, including the part about Millie's so-called guilt, I will post the entire 2 minutes of high-definition video on every site on the internet that will accept it. I will then contact my attorney and sue you for alienation of affection. Is that clear?" He said, "Totally, and thank you." I said, "So is there any part of your story that you want to change? It's all going to come out eventually, you know?" He said, "God help me, I swear." He was sincere. I knew it. I said, "I shall hear no more of you, and you will never speak to my wife again." Then, strangely enough, I added with some fleeting regret, "You could have been a decent writer." I was going to make him drown in this business completely. Now I had the whole picture. She had slipped. There was no doubt about it. But it seemed to be a one-time occurrence, and under extreme pressure, I was ready to forgive and forget. But I felt that we had to smooth things over in order to restore our fundamental bond as spouses. That bond was broken the moment she stepped into the elevator at the plaza. Accordingly, I realized that I could not simply accept her back without taking some affirmative step to draw a boundary that said, "Our new life begins here." And I'll also admit that I wanted a small piece of what she did to me. You don't have to tell me. I already know that part was petty and mean, but I needed it to move on. I'm human. I knew that 2 weeks without seeing me and her children would be an extremely painful lesson to her about the consequences it could lead to. When the kids came home from school, I was already waiting for them. I said, "How about we take a little family vacation to Ireland for a couple of weeks?" They were thrilled. Millie and I are of Irish descent, and the kids have wanted to go there since they were little. I told them to pack up and we would stay at a hotel near JFK Airport to get ready for the flight. Mostly I wanted to get us all out of the house as quickly as possible in case she came back. That was something I wasn't prepared to deal with, and I also wanted to avoid any emotional confrontations in front of the kids. They both asked, "Is Mom coming?" I replied, "No, she has to work. But you'll see her when we get back." I then looked online a few times to find out about tickets, hotel, and to call the school. 2 hours later, we left the house. Both kids were excited and happy. Millie didn't show up, but I expected her to. I knew it would take her some time to come around, and I was sure she was as afraid to confront me as I was to confront her. That night, at the JFK Marriott Hotel, I checked my email. Judging by the timing, she must have written it on her laptop right after I left the room. It said, "I love you. I know how much I hurt you, and I can't tell you how sorry I am. I wish I could have been stronger, but I failed us both. I know I'm not as young and beautiful as I used to be." And when the attractive young man started pushing my buttons, he finally pushed them enough for me to give up. I know I can't cancel that call. What can I say for myself, except that I was very drunk, naive, and weak? I was so upset. I made him swear it would never happen again. But he said the only way to end it would be someplace where we could really do it. He said he would leave if he could experience the fullness. I felt trapped, and the only way out was to fulfill his demands. I knew it would hurt you, and I wanted to avoid it at all costs. So in my arrogance, I decided to do as he demanded rather than just tell. I was too ashamed to admit it all, and I prayed that you would never find out. Let me add, I'm not as naive as I was a month ago. I realized that he could try to blackmail me again, and I'm determined to finally tell you if he does. But I wanted to take one last chance to make things right. I pledged to be completely honest. There will never be any more secrets between us. So I must confess to you that I absolutely and unreservedly enjoyed this thing you witnessed. I love it like that. You know that. But what you saw was no different than what I felt with you thousands of times for 17 wonderful years. But now I know what it's like to lose everything just by giving in. And I will never let myself go near that cliff again. I pledge my eternal loyalty to you because I know what the consequences are. I love you, and I swear I will spend the rest of my life fixing the scene you just witnessed. Please, please, please don't leave me. I can't bear to be without you. I wrote a letter back. It said, I love you and miss you already. You are and always will be my wife and best friend, and I want us to be together as much as you do. But your infidelity has destroyed the bond of trust between us. So, if you want our marriage to be strong again, we will have to rebuild our fundamental faith in each other from the ground up. The kids and I are going away for 2 weeks. That's how long your affair lasted. When we get back, I'd like us to start over as complete strangers. Then, hopefully we can rebuild our marriage brick by brick. I fully commit to that. I loved you once and I'm going to learn to love you again. If you agree to these terms, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Needless to say, this is your one and only pass. We had a wonderful time in the old country. We toured Dublin and Cork and drove down to Galway, where our family is from. Then we flew back to JFK Airport, with both kids looking like bad caricatures of the Notre Dame mascot. I haven't spoken to her in 2 weeks. I think the kids called her, but didn't mention it. I let her know our arrival time in a message I sent from Shannon Airport. I wasn't sure if she would make it to JFK Airport, but as soon as we went through customs, I saw her standing there. She looked absolutely nervous. She had obviously lost weight and was very pale. She was wearing a simple black skirt and 4-inch heels. It emphasized her figure wonderfully. She was wearing a simple white blouse with ruffles. She was a truly beautiful woman. The kids pounced on her like twins. I stood back as she hugged and kissed them both. She used to have to crouch down to do it. Now they were both almost as tall as her. They went to get our bags themselves. 15-year-old Jason was in charge. He had become a real man during our adventure. She turned toward me. She looked unsure, shy, and very frightened. I could see that she was barely on her feet, and that she was one rude word away from finally breaking down. She was my wife, and I loved her. I wanted this to work out as much as she did. So I took both her hands, pulled her to me, and hugged her. I whispered in her ear, "You look just beautiful. I've missed you more than I can express, and I'm a guy who has no words." That elicited a sob, which she muffled by snuggling into my shoulder. I waited until the trembling stopped and pushed her back. I looked into that adoring face and asked perplexed, "Don't I know you?" She looked puzzled, then cheerful. She said, "You don't know me. I have lost my husband, but I plan to find a new one whom I will love with all the strength my soul can muster. Would you like to apply for the position of stranger?" I replied, "It depends on whether you want a long-term exclusive relationship with one man." She said, "I have had experience of infidelity in the past. Now I am much older and wiser, and have learned a very good lesson, so I will devote the rest of my life to proving to the man I marry that I am his and his alone until death do us part." I said, "You make it sound like I could spend some time with you and get to know you better. How would you like to come to my house tonight? I have 2 wonderful children who would love to tell you about their adventures on Ulda Sod. And maybe, if we're feeling really romantic, you could even stay with us. We need to develop this new relationship, and the best way to get to know each other is to spend a lot of time together." She said, "Well then, let's start courting because this new relationship will definitely work." Then she kissed me with all the longing and despair she must have felt over the past 2 weeks. I know some of you feel that I should have acted differently at that point, and then walked away, if only to assert my superiority. But this story is not written for teenage boys and their fragile souls. It is about the deep, mature love between a man and a woman. It's a story about two people and their choices, for better or worse, who knows? If I hadn't heard the name Jack, things might have turned out exactly the way Millie had planned, and I wouldn't have had to make the decision I did. But instead, I had to make a choice that in retrospect turned out to be very simple. I had decided to live a happy and fulfilling life with the only woman I had ever loved. And that decision was one that I knew I had made correctly. The way of the shinobi requires the eye of an eagle, the stealth of a mongoose, the swiftness of a cheetah, and the patience of a horse. Standing here in my black hooded kikogi and mask, my felt boots and crossed katana on my back, I was all of those things, and also a little angry. Putting on a look of deep oriental calm, I observed the happenings around me, especially my wife Millie. Millie took on the Catwoman look for the evening. It was the brick house version played by Halle Berry, rather than Julie Newmar's more sedate costume. Millie may be 42 years old now, but she still has the figure to fully match such an image. She was laughing and talking to the four people around her. Among them were a couple of pirates, Mighty Thor, and someone who Han Solo would look like if he were 40+ years old. The pirates were Jim and his wife Sue, who had thrown the party. Thor, who was anything but mighty, was our neighbor Sam. Khan was a local cockhound named Bill. I helped her pick out her costume. I insisted on Little Red Riding Hood, or perhaps something chainmail style, but she insisted on going in an outfit more in keeping with the spirit of the event. Simply put, Millie is a stack. In her 40s, she's much freer from her earlier body issues, when she was self-conscious about her large cubes. But her new, more confident figure was a bit disconcerting to people like me. I didn't think she realized the effect she was having in that outfit, but maybe that's the way it is. As I watched her, she talked, danced, and generally used her pluses to gather an impressive amount of viewers. I wasn't even supposed to be at the party. I had a weekend event in Vegas. I couldn't refuse because I was one of the keynote speakers. Millie offered to come with me, since we were rarely apart. But this costume party is held once a year at our golf club, and our club is 300 yards from our house. So we both decided that Millie should go to the party without me. I flew into Las Vegas in the middle of the afternoon that Friday. I was met at McCarran by a representative of the publisher. He had a request. The guy who was supposed to run the whole event got held up in LA and couldn't make it until the next day, so could I please switch to Friday night? He realized that asking me to speak in front of 500 people without any preparation was an impossible task, but he swore that they would compensate me with a penthouse at the Bellagio for 2 nights of the conference, and they were all confident that I could do it. I was thrilled, because it meant I could exchange my ticket for a return ticket the next morning and still join Millie at the party. And spending 1 night as an aristocrat was just wonderful. I told him to forget about the second night and to expect him at 7 o'clock. There was still plenty of time before the show started, so I checked out star costumes and picked up a fancy ninja costume for tomorrow night. I always saw myself as a stealthy strongman, not a samurai on a college campus. I was going to call Millie as soon as I was checked in and tell her I'd be back in time for the party. But I was preoccupied with preparing for the presentation, and time slipped away from me. The presentation itself went exactly the way I wanted it to. I'm a stealth stand-up comic, and I don't think I've done a good job if the audience isn't jumping up and down in the aisles. I knocked the laugh meter down several times that night, and when I finished the show, I was very pleased with myself. The next stop is always the publisher's party. I leaned against the wall and did what I love to do, watch the guests socialize. I was sipping my second Johnny Walker Blue and watching the many long-term romances and one-night stands fade into the background, when I heard a sultry voice say, "You should be doing comedy." I turned around to see who this extremely perceptive person was, and came across the most adorable pair of emerald eyes I had ever seen. And the face and figure attached to those eyes would make Jessica Rabbit look bad. I choked on my drink, but managed to say thank you while wiping the scotch off my lapels at $95 a shot. She looked amused. She was the kind of woman whose figure could best be described as 2 watermelons attached to a broomstick. And she knew what her assets were, because the expensive turquoise dress that matched her red hair was cut in such a way that I suspected she'd used superglue to preserve her modesty. I said, just to keep the conversation going, "I assume you were at the talk. She replied that she had indeed been, and then proceeded to point out 10 errors in my logic, which, rather than making me angry, intrigued me. "I'm partial to smart women," I said. "You might want to argue about this somewhere else where the noise is not so distracting." She looked at me like I was long overdue for a question and said, "Lead the way." I walked toward Lily's bar, and she walked beside me, talking about all sorts of things. Once we were settled in a small corner booth, I said, "You know who I am? Who are you?" It turned out to be a 28-year-old graduate student from UNLV who earned her PhD in English. I did not speculate about how favorable this choice was, because I did not want to discourage her. I also did not ask the obvious question, "How did you manage to get to the event?" because it was obvious that she was wearing her credentials. I admired the male mind and the women who use it. We talked for quite a while, and she proceeded to get pretty damn drunk. I had already realized where this was going, and had reached my hotel room when she said rather loudly, "Why don't you ask me out now?" Even though I am totally committed to my wife and my marriage, I just don't think it's a good idea to be with a girl who is young enough to be my daughter. And I wasn't stupid enough to think she wanted it because of some noticeable resemblance to George Clooney. No. She wanted to go back and tell the whole gang in the campus malt shop about her victory over an author who was a frontman for a really famous one. So I escorted her to the concierge and told him to make sure she got home safely and to take the cab or limo or whatever it was to my room. My publisher owed me. Then I went upstairs to bed. I called Millie to let her know that I was coming to the party after all. It went straight to voicemail, which was understandable, because even though it was 11 o'clock in Vegas, it was 2 o'clock in the morning at home, and she had probably turned her phone off for the night. I was about to leave a message, and then a brilliant idea popped into my head. I want to surprise her. I just told her how much I love her. The return flight was business as usual. There used to be a certain class to air travel, but now, when I go through all the machinations at the airport, all that comes to my mind is the song from Rawhide. And I generally hate traveling from the East Coast to the Upper Coast because it puts the time 3 hours ahead. The flights to Vegas are the worst because they have a lot of first-time travelers on them, and there's always some guy in the next seat who probably drank for 24 hours straight before boarding. So with an hour-and-a-half layover in Denver and a fat drunk lady who slept for 6 hours with her head on my shoulder, I didn't get to JFK Airport until 7 p.m. I was very close to doing something bad just to make a statement about the airline industry. Millie clearly wasn't going to pick me up, so I rented a car and drove the 40 minutes home. She had already left for a party that could be heard a block away, and the kids were at their grandparents'. So I had plenty of time to change into a ninja. I added 2 fake crossed katanas and a pair of plastic nunchucks I pulled from 15-year-old Jason's childhood toy chest. He'd long since outgrown them, and Leonardo and Michelangelo could keep them for the evening. I was the epitome of ninjutsu. I sneaked into the party unnoticed. The party was in full swing, and since there were very few ninjas in the neighborhood at this time of day, everyone just assumed I was a guest. I ran into Mike and his wife Jill as soon as I approached the bar. He and I often play golf together with our wives. He said, "Nice suit, buddy." He had no idea it was me. I thought, Millie has been telling everyone I'm in Vegas, and this suit seems to be reliable. Maybe I should sit back for a minute or two and see what's really going on during my absences. Now I can hear you asking why I would do something so devious. Well, I always wondered how my wife behaved socially when I wasn't around, and I had a reason to reassure myself. I didn't think she was kidding me at all. We settled this a year ago. But we all show ourselves differently in different situations, and I was curious as to what Millie was really like, unfiltered by my presence. I admit it. I may be a bit besotted with my own wife, but if you knew this set of wit, creativity, and simple intelligence, you'd be ready to understand me. When I first got to know her, she was a bit withdrawn. Now in mixed companies, she is friendly, intelligent, and lively, but not particularly outgoing. The Millie I dated was nothing like that. She was much more flirtatious than any Millie I'd ever known. And she had a lot of men following her around, and she was clearly enjoying the attention. She's beautiful in any situation, but in a catsuit at a drunken party at a golf club, she was perfect. No other woman has come close to that set of qualities, Millie is an intelligent and wickedly humorous woman, and this quality of hers was on full display as she stood among the crowd of her admirers. They were constantly bringing her drinks. It didn't take a ninja master to realize what they were up to. They were trying to get her drunk, and the more drunk she got, the freer she seemed. She danced with each of them, moving in a way that suggested the incredible intensity I know she is capable of. Sometimes she allowed a little more, and she must have been very aware of how it worked, because all of her partners had a serious sense of humor when the dance was over. Most of them were married, so I wasn't particularly worried. Their wives kept them on a leash. But Bill, was recently divorced, and I realized that I would have to keep an eye on him. I had no chance of letting a weasel like Bill woo a shinobi master's wife. Millie could talk, dance, and flirt with everyone, but Han was always in the background, and his attention was about to be cut off. The party ended around 1 p.m., and my already visibly tipsy wife said goodbye to us and headed for the door. The guys were plying her with alcohol nonstop. I don't know what they thought they were getting out of it, since they all had chaperones. It was probably just a natural instinct to get a pretty girl drunk. She'd been slurring her words for the last half hour. I wasn't going to let her walk home like that, even if it was only a 3-minute walk, so I quickly followed her. I knew she'd kill me if she found out I'd been watching her socialize for 2 whole hours, but I had a story in reserve about how I'd just arrived and was in a hurry to be with her. Unfortunately, I wasn't fast enough. Han Solo appeared next to her, taking her hand. I stepped back. I was concerned, but I wanted to see how far she would go. I'm not naturally jealous, but every man on the planet has a fidelity gene that takes an interest in his wife. Nothing permanent is going to happen. That much I can guarantee. But I wanted to see if she could handle the slug or let it make a more aggressive move. He put his arm around her waist, supporting her as they walked down the path to our house. I followed him discreetly. A fierce shadow warrior would be hard to see, even if the light was better. But in the darkness of our elite neighborhood, I was practically invisible. They had reached the porch of our house when he turned her around and kissed her. She reciprocated. Millie burns hotter than anyone I've ever known. Maybe it's just a fraction of a degree. And when she kisses you, she's completely open, like no one else exists. This went on for a long time, probably about 10 seconds. My jealousy meter was ready to explode from the tension, and I sharpened my katana for both of them. Then she broke the kiss and saying, "Thank you, Bill," and turned and headed for the door. He had been rewarded for his gallantry by walking her home, and now it was time for her to go to bed. Bill was not at all happy about it. He quickly turned her toward him and tried to kiss her again. She said, "Stop it. Today was really nice. Don't ruin it," he reprimanded. She replied, "I'm sorry if you got that impression, but I'm not interested in being with you or anyone else but my husband. Ever." Bill let out a low growl and literally ripped off part of her costume. Now she was standing on the porch of our house for all to see. He grabbed her and pulled her to him, saying, "You're going to love this." I saw her try to hit him with her knee, but he was too strong. She bit him. In response, he slapped her hard with anger and she fell to the ground. It was then that the full fury of the East came upon him. I hit him from behind on the shoulders, straightening my arms and striking him with a swinging blow. It was a hard push that should have hit him and sealed him face first into the wall. He was much bigger than me, but he didn't know how to fight. He was thinking of the Marquess of Queensberry. I was thinking of any convenient way to inflict as much pain as possible. He turned angrily in a boxing stance, and before he could react, I stepped toward him and smacked him in the forehead. The forceful blow to his head must have broken his cheekbone and nose. Blood rushed to my forehead, and he collapsed as if he'd been shot. I thought, God, I hope I didn't kill him. Millie had just barely recovered and was just starting to get up when I dragged Han back off the porch and kicked him a couple times just in case. A little voice in my head growled, "Just try that again." I was acting on instinct. But when I thought about it, it seemed to me that the mysterious ninja should quickly disappear into the night. Millie rose uncertainly to her feet as I threw the still unconscious Han Solo over my shoulder fireman style. The fact that Millie was stunned by his blow didn't make me handle him carefully. I didn't want to block our driveway with the rental car, so it was parked 2 houses away on the other side of the street. I threw Han next to the car rather vigorously. I got into the car and drove away quietly. Millie stared after my car as I drove away. Then I saw her turn around, still out of costume, and walk shakily toward the house, closing the door. I called 911 on my cell phone to report a man lying on the curb. I figured he was far enough up the street that the police couldn't connect the dots, and I was sure Bill wouldn't enlighten them. I thought for a moment before calling Millie. She needed a plausible deniability. Besides being terribly embarrassing, the whole incident could turn into a criminal prosecution for me. And that was why the Shadow Warrior had to be away from the scene of the crime. The beauty of the situation was that not a single person knew I was a ninja. No one had seen my face all evening, and everyone thought I was in Las Vegas. So, pulling onto the Southern State Freeway toward Kennedy Airport, I called Millie. She answered just before the message went to voicemail. From her voice, it sounded like she was crying. I said as brightly as I could, "This is your wake-up call, sleepyhead. How was the party?" She replied rather meekly, "Not much. In fact, it was very boring. When should I pick you up?" I said, "At 11 a.m., I'll be waiting at the terminal so I don't have to park." I had to meet her on the street because I had already gone through airport security the day before. She said, "I'll be there. I've missed you more than I can say." She looked a little depressed and crying. I replied, "Well, I miss you more, and I love you more than is possible." The guy at the Marriott airport didn't even blink an eye when I checked in wearing black kikogi and felt boots. I was wearing a hood and mask, and my plastic katana and nunchucks were in a trash can outside. The airport sees a lot of things. I went to sleep that night dreaming of Millie. Every husband wants a wife who would be the perfect lady in the living room and wild you-know-where. And in all the time I've known her, Millie has been one of those. Tonight she had proven herself absolutely loyal to me, even if it took the intervention of a mysterious ninja. That must have scared her, and I wondered how it would affect her. She was as beautiful as ever as she pulled her Jag XF up to the curb, fresh, makeup on, hair pulled back. She was the complete opposite of yesterday's persona. The farmer's daughter herself couldn't look cleaner or healthier. Before she arrived, I had bought the clothes I was wearing and was carrying a look-alike, but the only thing inside was a used ninja costume. She kissed me with a special desire and feeling. I understood. It was her first kiss since last night with Bill, and it felt powerful. We drove 40 minutes back to the airport, and I told her about the presentation without mentioning a single reference to the gorgeous stars. On the other hand, she omitted phrases like, "almost fell over drunk," "hands everywhere," "dry humping on the dance floor," and "almost fell over in the living room" from the story about her night. I asked her if anything unpleasant had happened while I was away. She nonchalantly mentioned that one of our neighbors had been robbed after the party. She said he had spent the night in the hospital with a concussion. She said it was rumored to be a roving gang that decided to riot in the suburbs. I asked her who it was. She replied with a learned casualness, "Bill Martin from down the street, you know him." I replied, "Of course I know him. He's the biggest rooster in 30 square miles. He probably got caught wanting another man's wife and got his nose broken." She turned pale and trembled. It dawned on me that maybe she was scared. She replied, "Well, you're home now, and I'll never go to an event like this again without you. I got really drunk last night." I said with marvelous seriousness, "I hope you haven't done anything you haven't told me about." I knew it was a cheap shot, and I got the expected reaction, furious rage. She said with regret in her voice, "Perhaps I was a little too familiar with some of the men when we danced, but there's nothing about it that you haven't seen before." She was right. She was always being hugged on the dance floor. But I'd never seen Millie pounce on people, play with them, and occasionally allow more than usual, which I'd witnessed last night. And of course, her adventure with Bill and the Shadow Warrior was ruled out for obvious reasons. I reasoned that she was embarrassed to tell me about it. We had lunch, but we were both in too much of a hurry. That's what happens when we're apart for a long time. I said, "I need to go upstairs and unpack." Mostly, I wanted to hide my new traveling ensemble so she couldn't find it. A few minutes later, she peeked into the bedroom. I said, I want to take a shower first, and told her about my journey. When I went out to dry my hair, she was in bed, the curtains slightly drawn, and the midday light emphasized her all over. She looked at me with a speculative gaze. I didn't need to be a mind reader to know what she was thinking. I walked slowly toward the bed. She turned slightly toward me. I sat down next to her and looked into her eyes. I turned quietly and lay down next to her. She moved toward me. Millie is the most resilient person I know, a companion you can always rely on in a difficult situation. But she needs physical affirmation when we part. It's like her fear of separation drives her. She cheated on me once, and I believe she has been unsure of me since we reconciled. And the more insecure she was, the more she needed me to be with her. It's like the physical connection we make is strengthening. I'll make a small digression here and tell you right away that a small piece has been cut, and it will only be available in our exclusive community on Patreon. Give it a like and subscribe, and we'll continue. There was something about her behavior last night that made me become more selfish than I'd ever been to erase Bill's ghost from her memory. I lay there, only slightly recovered from the heart attack, and sanity was slowly returning to me. Finally, I pulled my thoughts together to roll over on my side and look at her. I kissed her cheek. She opened one eye and looked at me with a smug look. I said sincerely, I'm sorry if I hurt you. She looked at me like I was an idiot and replied, I'm hurt! You just set a new record for me. We took a shower. Ended up being there for another hour. I brought us both a cup of coffee, and we sat down on the veranda. It was the middle of a beautiful fall day in Suffolk County. The children would be home soon, and I wanted to keep things as simple and honest as possible. But before I could open my mouth, she said, Honey, I've done something terrible and I have to tell you about it. This raised my anxiety level to a 5, and the pressure that suddenly built in my chest was something I'd only experienced at the bottom of Marianne's trench. She had cheated again. I sat there looking at her with a look of utter horror on my face. There was no way I was going to relive this again. She said, You know that I love you and that I promised you that there would be no secrets between us. I nodded sullenly. She said, We have a new intern in the office. Millie works at one of my publishers. Who is he? I asked, without adding this time. She laughed and said, No, silly, it's a woman. I thought, Oh my God, she's with another woman. I didn't know what to think about it. She said, Her name is Emma, and she's working on her doctorate at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. It sounded vaguely familiar. She said, Emma is a spectacular girl, and she was meeting with her counselor in Las Vegas at the same time you were there. It sounded very familiar. Millie took both my hands in hers and said, Lord, forgive me, but I asked her to try to seduce you at the conference to see if you would be faithful to me. I know how much I've hurt you with my past failures, and I just had to find out if it changed our marriage. She said, I talked to her yesterday before the party, and she said she got really drunk and proposed to you and you put her in a limo and sent her home. I laughed out loud with relief. Was that how it was? She faded her eyes in embarrassment and said, I should have confided in you, and I am ashamed of myself. I would have forgiven you, but you mean so much to me. I took her hand, lifted it up, and kissed it with all the tenderness and love I could muster for my wife and best friend. Then I said, Well then, I have a shameful confession for you. She looked completely shocked. I knew what she was thinking because I had just had that thought myself. I said, Wait here, and hid upstairs to try on the secret mask of a ninjutsu master and shadow shinobi warrior. She stared sullenly into the distance as I reappeared behind her on the deck, with only my sparkling eyes peering out from beneath my suit. She shrieked with horror. A look of utter amazement and bewilderment appeared on her face, and then I saw that she understood. I said, Shinobi, master of ninjutsu, at your service, mistress. Within seconds, Shinobi had to use all of her ninja arts to avoid the blows she tried to throw. Then she was horrified. She asked, Have you seen everything? I replied, All of it. She asked, And you were the one who saved me from that creep? I replied, Hai Gosujin-sama? After that, she started laughing. When the children came back, she was still laughing. I think they thought, their mother had lost her mind. In fact, their mother had lost all doubt that the bond between husband and wife would ever be broken, even if that recognition required the deep secrets of the land of the rising sun. Well, this wonderful story has come to an end, dear viewer. From my point of view, not everything is so simple here, and I would have acted completely differently with this girl, especially when she hid the kiss for the second time. But so ended the story of our hero, who, having turned into a ninja master, unexpectedly discovers the intriguing duality of his wife and the hidden depths of his own peace of mind. This is a story about trust and temptation, about loyalty and mind games, about complex moral choices among the simple everyday decisions we make, whether we remain true to ourselves and our loved ones. The main character learned that his wife not only forced him to test his fidelity, but also experienced temptation herself. Ultimately, despite the feelings of jealousy and resentment he experienced, he remained faithful to his love and obligations to his family. As a result, they both discovered the ability to overcome temptations, as well as deeply buried weaknesses and fears. The world they lived in was full of temptations, but their love and mutual understanding became a strong foundation that allowed them to move on, crossing the shadows of the past and building a new future. Given that this episode contains bad scenes for YouTube and exciting twists, we should mention that some parts of the story are only available on our Patreon. Subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and we will continue to share new stories full of aspirations. Thank you all for being with us on this journey through the zigzags of life and love. Remember that every choice and decision, no matter how mundane they may seem, carries the weight of fate, and sincere loyalty and love can become an anchor in the stormy sea of life's trials.